Last week, sitting at a dinner following a wedding blessing, a fellow guest turned to me and asked, "What keeps you awake at night?" Anxious about the future of Leo Beck College, the progressive rabbinical seminary, where Rabbi Igor and I and over 170 liberal and reform rabbis have been ordained since it was founded in 1956, I was bending the ear of my neighbor, an art historian and trustee of a significant academic library collection of Judaica, and hoping he might offer some pointers for the precarious future of the college. But I have been reflecting on his question all week, what keeps me awake at night? And wondering too, what is it that might keep many of us awake at night? Since the beginning of the pandemic in March 2020, when we closed the synagogue and conducted services from our homes, gradually returning to the sanctuary over succeeding months, speaking to a virtual congregation, introducing recorded music from loyal and devoted musicians who stayed with us throughout COVID-19, hoping, praying that as things became a little easier, people would be encouraged to return to live worship rather than live stream. I have felt discomforted repeatedly by the close-to-the-bone words of one of the evening prayers that forms our daily Shabbat and festival liturgy. It touches on what keeps me awake at night. The prayer is formulated as a blessing, the second blessing following the Shema and immediately preceding the Amidah. It begins with these words sung so beautifully just a few moments ago to a Sephardi tune. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom, v'ha'amidenu malkeinu l'chaim. Grant, eternal God, that we may lie down in peace, and let us rise up to life renewed. The blessing is part of what the Talmud calls Geula Arichta, a long redemption, implying that this blessing is an extension of the previous blessing, in which we refer to the Exodus from Egypt, with the words, "You have freed us from oppressors and delivered us from tyrants. You led us out of Egypt, forever to serve you in freedom." But merging these two blessings into one long blessing is to misunderstand their full import. One is a blessing of praise for redemption in the past, of reference to coming out of Egypt, the crossing of the Sea of Reeds, God's redemptive activities with Israel, while the second blessing, known simply by its opening word, Hashkivenu, cause us to lie down, is a supplication to guard us from those things that keep us awake at night and to help us fall into a deep and undisturbed sleep, free from anxiety. The blessing is mentioned in the Mishnah of Rabbi Judah the Prince, edited at the beginning of the 3rd century of the Common Era, and again in the Talmud, yet scarcely merits any kind of discussion or analysis. And this is surprising, because unlike the blessings of praise, thanksgiving, and acknowledgement of God as creator, giver of Torah, and redeemer that are recited either side of the Shema, this blessing is a prayer of petition. As its opening words indicate, we ask God to protect us through the night, to spread over us the shelter of God's peace, and to be our help. But it is the middle of the blessing that makes us tremble. And I am grateful to Rabbi Tony Bayfield, who in a recent talk articulated exactly what this part of the prayer means to him and what I have long felt about its words. The blessing continues with this entreaty, using the same words that we just recited in one of the verses of Avinu Malkeinu. V'haser me'aleinu oyev dever v'cherev v'ra'av v'yagon. The translation in our Machzor says simply, shield us from sickness and war, from famine and distress. But the literal translation gives us a little more. Remove from us the enemy, the plague, the sword, hunger, and sorrow. Here is how Rabbi Bayfield interprets these close-to-the-bone words using another translation. Disease, he says, simply screams pandemics, the Black Death, the Great Plague, the Spanish flu pandemic that carried off my great-grandfather in 1918, and COVID-19, which carried off my own father in 2020. Violence, he says, howls equally loudly war, not just the war in Ukraine, but the appalling cloud of terminal weaponry hanging over Taiwan, China, and the West. And famine, he says, equally loudly and equally insistently points to the terrifying crop failures and devastating floods resulting from climate change. Each time we recite these words, sickness and war, famine and distress, it is as though the prayer holds up a mirror to our own world. And even now, with the threat of COVID less acute than it was 1 and certainly 2 years ago, the mirror frightens me yet again. Hilary Mantel, whose premature death just last week has left us bereft of a highly intelligent, imaginative artist of words and worlds, writes this on loss. The pattern of all losses mirrors the pattern of the gravest losses. Disbelief is followed by numbness, numbness by distraction, despair, exhaustion. Your former life still seems to exist, but you can't get back to it. There is a glimpse in dreams of those peacock lawns and fountains, but you're fenced out, and each morning you wake up to the loss over again. Here, Mantel is speaking of grief in her rereading of C.S. Lewis's slim volume, A Grief Observed, written after the death of his wife. But as Lewis observes in his opening line, no one ever told me that grief felt so like fear. COVID-19 left us both grief-stricken and fearful, grieving the loss of loved ones, mourning our own lost pre-pandemic lives, those former lives that Mantel says you can't get back to. Even before we can process those lost years and what they meant to us personally, we find ourselves confronted repeatedly with an absence in our world of imagination, compassion, empathy, understanding, a deficiency of justice and equity. And in their place, there is war, famine, hunger, and the appalling wedge of inequality that has been driven further between rich and poor in our own country. These are the things that keep me awake at night, that sicken me and paralyze all good intentions, all ambition to reclaim a world that might bring peace, blessings, and hope for those most in need. I said that this is the blessing that discomforts and holds up a mirror of dark reality to our moral sickness, to the war waged by Russia, to hunger, food banks, homelessness, and the wretchedness of people's desperation and sorrow. And yet, it is also a blessing that offers us comfort. It asks that we may lie down in peace, but also that we may rise up to life renewed. For each day is a new day, and each year, like this year, whose threshold we have just crossed, a new year. It is this prayer, more than any other in our daily Shabbat and festival liturgy, that also gives us a quiet hope. It is a blessing that nurtures faith in a presence that is gracious and merciful. It makes us believe that our existence matters, that we must look forward to life renewed. It stills our anxious spirits and steers us away from wrongdoing. It is a blessing of spiritual comfort and moral responsibility. As we enter this new year of 5783, may we open ourselves to this discomforting purpose of prayer when we become too complacent, to prayers that will inspire us to use our gifts for the good of all humanity. And may we derive comfort and hope from this act of coming together as a community in prayer, reflection, and determination not to lose hope in the future. Let us place our trust in God's presence, Hapores Sukat Shalom, Aleinu v'al kol yoshvei tevel, whose sheltering peace descends on us and all who dwell on earth. Amen.